Well, good afternoon, everyone. I've been doing some sermons on prophecy. There's 2 I've done, and there's 3 more to go. But I got asked about the Vandals and the Heruli and the Ostrogoths, the 3 tribes that totally disappeared off the face of the earth. Okay? So I wanted to go through those a little bit today, who they were and what they did. Let's turn to Daniel, the 7th chapter. Daniel 7, and we'll go to verses 1 through 7. So, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, and sea usually means people, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, had eagle's wings. I watched it till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And in my sermon, the little horn part 1, we know that is Babylon. And then in suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, and this was Medo-Persia. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. It means it was very fast to go across country and do what it was going to do. The beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And we know that that is Greece, and that Alexander the Great was replaced by 4 generals, and that's represented by the 4 heads. And then let's go to verse 7. It said, After I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong, and it was different type of beast. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue of its feet. And this is ancient Rome. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And these 10 horns were 10 nations of Western Europe. And I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, and this represents the papacy, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. So there were 3 kingdoms plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. And we know that as the papacy. Now, let us look at the 3 horns in verse 8 that were plucked up by the roots, 3 kingdoms. So we go to Western Europe, which 10 nations rose up under Rome in Western Europe. So the 10 horns represent 10 kings, and those 10 kings, and according to National Sunday Law by A. Marcuson, the Alemanni became Germany, the Franks became France, the Burgundians became Switzerland, the Suevi became Portugal, the Anglo-Saxons became Britain, the Visigoths became Spain, the Lombards became Italy, and then 8, 9, and 10 were completely taken out of history. They were completely plucked up. So if you pluck something up, it's gone. If you pluck a tomato plant up by the roots, it's dead. It's not going to produce any more tomatoes. So these are gone. They're plucked up by the roots. The Vandals, the Ostrogoths, and the Heruli. Now, Garner Ted Armstrong agreed in the booklet, The Mark of the Beast, that the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and the Heruli were 3 of the 10 Germanic tribes, as described in the 10 horns coming out of the head of Rome. And these 3 kingdoms were plucked up by the roots, or completely destroyed, and he totally agrees with that. So we take the Vandals, and according to my old World Book Encyclopedia, volume 20 on page 218D, the Vandals were a Germanic tribe of barbarians that invaded the Roman Empire during the 400s AD and assisted in the decline of ancient Rome. And the Vandals were probably no more destructive than other empires, but because they sacked Rome and did various things, the word vandalism came about, meaning somebody who goes in and breaks things, does disturbing things to you. So they were originally, they lived along the southern coast of Norway and Sweden and Denmark and the Danish islands. And they migrated to Central Europe around 100 BC, and they settled in what is now known as southern Poland. In 406 AD, they entered the Roman Empire and raided Gaul. In 409, they moved into Spain. And the peak of their power was under King Genesaric, who ruled from 428 to 477 AD. They conquered much in Africa, and at one time they ruled the Mediterranean Sea. They had the largest navy in the Mediterranean Sea at one time, in the 400s. That was primarily after Carthage fell. They took over the shipbuilding of Carthage. In the Internet article, History of the Vandals by Brian Adam, he explained their mastery of the sea. When Carthage fell on October the 19th, 439 AD, the Vandals took over the shipyard at Carthage, literally doubling or making greater their navy. And in 440 AD, they were going to, notice the Texas verb to be, we're going to. I am going to, you are going to. In Tennessee, it's I am a fixing to. But I think that's rubbed off on me, and now I say we are going to. But they were sailing on Sicily to take over Sicily because of the large grain and oil there, large amount of grain and oil there, and probably produced more oil and more grain than any place in the Mediterranean. And the Roman ships turned them back. They were eventually vanished because in 455 they sacked Rome, and in 5 Justinian, the Roman emperor, sent his forces against them, and eventually they destroyed them as a nation. So, now history will tell you that it's because they sacked Rome. One of the reasons why, well, the primary reason why is they were of a religion called Arianism. Arianism does not believe in the deity of Christ. Okay, they do not believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God or was God. They say he's a good man. And Justinian, being basically a Catholic, if you could call it Catholic Church at that time, they had the papacy and all that. If you are the leader of the church, but if Justinian was the Roman emperor, he was a Christian, and he was going to kill them out basically because they were Arian. So let's go to the Ostrogoths. Rome fell to the Goths in 476 AD, and you can find that in the simple booklet, The Mark of the Beast, and you can look it up online. But the Goths, and it's on page 33 of The Mark of the Beast by Garner Ted Armstrong. And Justinian sent his general Belisarius to Carthage and later to Rome to overthrow the Ostrogothic king in AD 543. And the Ostrogoths were a branch of the Goths. There was 2 branches of the Goths, G-O-T-S. The Ostrogoths were, under Theodoric the Great, established a kingdom in Italy in the late 5th and 6th centuries. The Ostrogoths traced their origins to a kingdom north of the Black Sea in the 3rd and 4th centuries. So, 2 branches of the Goths, the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. Are we getting a signal for something? Anyway, so from all the Goths who defeated Rome, there came 2 tribes. The eastern Goths were called the Ostrogoths. The western Goths were called the Visigoths. The Visigoths ended up in Spain. So.
Can you spell the other one?
Bisogoths. They were the western Goths. We're getting some interference. We'll just go on. But in 474 AD, the king of the Goths, named Theodoric the Great, became the king of the Ostrogoths and mustered his troops against Rome, and Rome fell in 476 AD. When Justinian came along, he wanted to get the Ostrogoths out of Rome. And General Belisarius helped him do that. So, due to an uprising by Totilius, which was an Ostrogoth king in 545 AD. Justinian's general Belisarius was sent to Italy, and he won several battles against King Totilius. And then Justinian later assigned Narses as a general to take over fighting against the Totilius forces. And Totilius was killed in 552 at the Battle of Taginae, and the uprising was completely stopped at the Battle of Mons Lactarius in 553 AD. There were a few more uprisings, but by 562, the Ostrogoth name disappeared from history. So that one was taken out primarily by Justinian. And then the Heruli. And I'm going to tell you, the Heruli, the Ostrogoths and the Vandals were not that hard to find information on. But did you want to try these lights here in the back?
That one stopped when he moved it, but you just unplugged it, so that doesn't make sense.
Okay. The Heruli were hard to find stuff on. My old encyclopedias didn't have, I've got 3 sets at home, and none of them had the Heruli in them. I had to go to different places to try and find out what happened to the Heruli. But the Heruli were an East Germanic tribe who migrated from Scandinavia to the Black Sea, and in the 3rd century AD they did that. They were part of a, that was it. Finally we found it.
No, I got it.
Oh,
You got it back there.
got it back there, okay. And they did several raids and incursions into Greece. Nothing like distractions.
That's what I was doing. It's coming off the angel camp.
Just keep trucking.
The best days for the Heruli were, they had about 300 years. And primarily they were hired as mercenaries, and they also did trade. And they actually fought against some of the other tribes far Rome as mercenaries. They also traded like gold and silver and many other things, even hair. Supposedly they had blue eyes, and maybe some of them were blonde.
Oh, wow.
And by the way, they sold women's hair. And if it was blonde, then they made wigs out of it. If it was not blonde, then they made catapults out of it. So found out a lot about the Heruli and what they, but they were good traders and handicrafts and warriors and all of that. Now, they didn't start out being Aryan, according to one of the articles I found. They started out being they worshipped a lot of different gods. They were around from the land of Scandinavia and the Black Sea. And they would actually practice polytheistic, or many gods, following many gods. And if you got really old in their society, they would appoint someone outside the family to go and kill you, and then they would burn you. And women were supposed to hang themselves upon their husband's death. So they weren't a very nice people, but under Justinian, they started practicing more Christian ways, and they became a better society, a much more gentler society. And that's when they started being mercenaries and traders, and they traded a lot from around the Rhine River. And so Justinian assumed the throne as emperor, and the Heruli started adopting a lot of the Christian beliefs, but later they became Arian. They started becoming much more kinder people too. The Heruli were very different warriors than the Romans. They didn't really carry armor into battle, and they would carry a shield and a sword, and that would be about it. And they gained a lot of power and control. With the Goths, along with the Goths, they sacked Athens, Sparta, and Byzantium. But the Romans defeated them in 269 AD during an encounter with Narses, which is now modern-day Serbia, in what is now modern-day Serbia. In the 4th century, this tribe was dominated by the Ostrogoths and the Huns, and that's Attila the Hun. And the Battle of Nadao, or Nadao, Nedao, The Heruli successfully defeated the Huns and formed an independent kingdom. They decided to join forces with Odoacer, who was in charge of federal troops that handled deposing Emperor Romulus Augustus during the year 476 AD. By 508 AD, the Lombards, who later become Italy, defeated the Heruli, which forced them to go back into their homeland of Scandinavia. And Rome allowed them to settle in some of the lesser populated territories, but they pretty much just ended after that, after their defeat, and they were scattered, and they disappeared from history after that. So the three disappeared from history: Vandals, the Ostrogoths, and the Heruli. And the primary reason, you won't find it in history in most cases. You have to go to a religious book of some kind, because history always wants to report battles and where they were scattered to and things like that, and where they disappeared. But the primary reason is they were Arian. They were not Christian. And that's the primary reason why they disappeared. So if you want me to, I can make notes on these. I know it's a lot to go through right quick, but the basic reason, they were Arian. They did not believe in the deity of Christ. And Justinian, who was emperor at that time, was Christian, and he didn't like that, and he didn't want it to continue. Probably the greater of these were the Vandals. The Vandals were a tremendous navy, took over the shipbuilding at Carthage and after its defeat, and were the largest sea power in the Mediterranean. The second was probably the Ostrogoths, who was very powerful because they took over Italy, but Justinian was able to defeat them and run them out of Italy. And then later they just disappeared. And then the Heruli, who were pretty much living on trade and as mercenaries, mainly fighting for Rome. So my next sermon maybe next week. I'll have to talk to Ron and see if he wants to do a sermon, but maybe next week. Why not? Why not? Okay. Brenda says, but my next sermon will be on the Little Horn Part 2, and it will be about Daniel 8 and Revelation 13, and it will continue on in this vein about what is happening in prophecy. When we know the history, we can figure out what's to come, and that's what I'm doing. I'm giving the history so we can figure out what's to come. So I turn it over to Joe to continue, and thank you.